A summer with no shelter. The judge's gavel hung in the air like a threat, and Martha Hale knew with bone-deep certainty that she was about to lose everything that mattered. Her 4 children sat rigid on the courthouse bench behind her, their faces pale in the summer heat streaming through the tall windows. Across the aisle, her husband, the man who'd abandoned them to starvation and fear, sat with his lawyer, confident and clean-shaven, playing the role of concerned father. The only thing standing between Martha and complete devastation was a quiet rancher she'd known for barely 3 months, and a marriage certificate still smelling of fresh ink. Before we begin this journey through the scorching summer of 1942, I invite you to stay with Martha's story until the very end. If this tale moves you, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far her story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, to a dusty Colorado train station, and a woman with nothing left to lose. The heat was the first thing Martha noticed when she stepped off the train, a physical presence that pressed against her skin like a wool blanket soaked in bathwater. The platform shimmered in the afternoon glare, and the air tasted of dust and distant wheat. She stood motionless for a moment, 4 children clustered around her like birds seeking shade, and took in the town that was supposed to be their salvation. Salvation looked like disappointment wearing clapboard and paint. "Mama, I'm thirsty." 6-year-old Tommy tugged at her sleeve, his face flushed and damp. "I know, sweetheart." Martha smoothed his hair back, feeling the fever warmth of sun-heated skin. "We'll find water soon." But first, they needed to find everything else: shelter, work, a reason for this town to care whether they lived or died. She picked up the single suitcase that held everything they owned: 3 changes of clothes, a family Bible she couldn't bring herself to abandon, and a photograph of her mother. Ruth, her eldest at 12, immediately took Tommy's hand. 9-year-old James hefted the canvas bag with their remaining food, and 4-year-old Annie pressed close to Martha's leg. They made quite a picture, she thought grimly. A thin woman in a coat too heavy for summer, and 4 dust-covered children who looked like they'd been traveling since the dawn of creation. Which wasn't far from the truth. The station master, an older man with suspenders and skeptical eyes, watched them from the doorway of his office. Martha approached him directly, keeping her voice level and polite. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for the employment office, or perhaps someone who might know of work available." He scratched his jaw, studying her with the frank assessment of a man who'd seen too many desperate people roll through on eastbound and westbound trains. "Employment office closed down 2 years back. Not enough employment to justify the office." He paused. "What kind of work you looking for?" "Any kind. I can clean, cook, mend, keep books if needed. I'm strong, and my children are well behaved." The station master's expression softened slightly, but his words didn't. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be harsh, but half the women in this county are looking for the same work, and most of them don't have 4 extra mouths attached to the deal." Martha felt the truth of it settle in her chest like a stone, but she kept her face composed. "I understand. Is there a boarding house, at least? Somewhere we might stay while I look around?" "Mrs. Peterson's place, 3 blocks north." He pointed down the dusty main street. "But she'll want payment up front, and it won't be cheap feeding 5. "Thank you kindly." She gathered her children and started walking, the suitcase growing heavier with each step. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the dirt road into a ribbon of white glare. Sweat trickled down her spine, and she could feel the beginning of a headache building behind her eyes. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house was a narrow 2-story structure with peeling paint and lace curtains that had gone gray with age. The proprietor herself answered Martha's knock, a heavy-set woman with sharp eyes and flour on her apron. "I need a room," Martha said simply. "Just for a few nights while I find work." Mrs. Peterson looked past her to the children waiting on the porch steps. "I got 1 room available, $2 a night, meals not included, payment in advance." $2. Martha had $7.30 to her name. At that rate, she'd be broke in 4 days. "I can pay for 2 nights now," she said carefully, "and I'm happy to work off additional nights, cooking, cleaning, whatever you need." The older woman's expression wasn't unkind, but it was firm. "I do my own cooking and cleaning, dear, and I can't afford to extend credit, even if I wanted to. Times are hard for everyone. I understand. Martha kept her voice steady despite the fear rising in her throat. 2 nights then. She counted out 4 precious dollars and watched them disappear into Mrs. Peterson's apron pocket. The room she received in exchange was barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand it contained. The children would have to sleep on the floor, but it was shelter, for now. "Mama, are we staying here?" Annie asked, her small voice uncertain. "For tonight and tomorrow night," Martha said, forcing brightness into her tone. "Then we'll find something better." Ruth's eyes met hers over the younger children's heads, and Martha saw her daughter's disbelief. Ruth had always been too perceptive for comfort. She knew their situation was desperate. She just didn't know yet how desperate. That night, after feeding the children the last of their bread and the hard cheese she'd rationed carefully since Kansas, Martha lay awake listening to them breathe. The room was stifling despite the open window, and mosquitoes whined in the darkness. Tomorrow she would walk this town until her feet bled if necessary. Someone, somewhere, needed help badly enough to overlook 4 children and a woman with no references. Someone had to. The next morning, Martha woke before dawn and braided her hair with careful precision. She put on her one good dress, navy blue with buttons up the front, and pinned her grandmother's cameo at her throat. Ruth would watch the younger ones. Martha would make herself presentable, humble, and indispensable. The town revealed itself slowly in the early light. A general store with a faded awning, a bank that looked more prosperous than its surroundings, a diner with hand-lettered signs advertising breakfast specials, a feed store, a blacksmith, a small office that might belong to a lawyer or a doctor. She started with the diner. The owner, a tired-looking woman named Grace, listened to Martha's pitch while wiping down the counter. "I do need help," she admitted, "but I can't pay much and the hours are long, 5 in the morning to 9 at night, 6 days a week." "I can work those hours," Martha said quickly. "What about my children? Is there somewhere they could—" Grace shook her head. "Can't have children underfoot in a working kitchen. It's a liability and customers won't like it. I'm sorry." The general store owner said the same thing. So did the woman at the boarding house across town, and the man who ran the feed store, and the bank manager who looked uncomfortable even discussing employment with a woman who had 4 children in tow. By noon, Martha's feet ached and her hope had worn thin as paper. She bought a loaf of day-old bread with precious coins and found a spot of shade behind the church where the children could eat in relative privacy. "Mama, did you find work?" James asked, his young face serious. "Not yet, sweetheart. But I will." "What if you don't?" Ruth's question was quiet, almost whispered. Martha met her daughter's eyes steadily. "Then I'll keep looking. We didn't come this far to give up now." But privately, as she watched her children eat bread that was supposed to last 2 days, she felt the first real tendrils of panic. One more night at the boarding house. $7.30 had become $3.30. After that, what? The afternoon was even hotter than the morning. The main street emptied as sensible people retreated indoors, seeking whatever coolness thick walls and drawn curtains could provide. Martha kept walking, approaching businesses she'd already tried, asking again with variations on her original pitch. The answers didn't change. By 4 o'clock, she found herself on the outskirts of town, past the last of the clapboard buildings, where the road turned to packed dirt and stretched away toward distant wheat fields. The landscape shimmered with heat, and she could smell the dry grass and sun-baked earth. She should turn back. There was nothing out here but farmland and the occasional ranch house set far from the road. But the thought of returning to that stifling boarding house room, of seeing the question in Ruth's eyes and the hunger the children were too polite to mention, it kept her walking. The wheat fields stretched endlessly on both sides, golden and bending in waves when the hot wind blew. In the distance, she could see a cluster of buildings that might be a ranch. Closer, near a sagging fence line, a truck sat idling, its engine ticking in the heat. A man stood beside it, his back to her, doing something with the fence wire. He wore work clothes faded to no particular color, a hat that had seen better years, and boots coated in the same dust that covered everything else in this relentless summer. Martha hesitated. Approaching a strange man on a deserted road wasn't wise, but wisdom was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. She walked closer, her footsteps crunching on gravel. The man turned at the sound. He was perhaps 40, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the Colorado sun, broad shoulders, and a stillness about him that suggested he didn't waste energy on unnecessary movement. "Help you, ma'am?" His voice was quiet, without the wariness she'd heard in so many others that day. Martha straightened her shoulders, calling on reserves of dignity she wasn't sure she possessed. "I'm looking for work. Any kind of work. I can cook, clean, mend fences, tend animals, whatever needs doing. I'm strong and I learn fast." The man regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. His eyes were gray, she noticed, the color of rain clouds on a distant horizon. "You staying in town?" he asked. "For tonight. After that," she let the sentence trail off, unwilling to speak the uncertainty aloud. "You got family with you?" "4 children." She lifted her chin slightly, daring him to turn away like all the others. "They're well behaved and they can help, the older ones at least." Something shifted in the man's expression, though she couldn't have named what. He pulled off his work gloves and extended a hand. "Caleb Rowan. I run a ranch about 3 miles west of here." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses and honest strength in his grip. "Martha Hale." "What can you do, Mrs. Hale?" The question was direct but not unkind. "Specifically," Martha took a breath and answered with absolute honesty, "I can manage a household, cooking, preserving food, sewing, basic medical care. I can handle chickens, milk cows if needed, tend a garden. I'm organized and I work clean. I don't complain and I don't quit when things get difficult. My children are 12, 9, 6, and 4. The older ones can do chores appropriate to their age. We're willing to work for room and board until I can prove my worth for wages." Caleb Rowan listened without interrupting, his gray eyes assessing her with the same frank evaluation the station master had used, but without the dismissiveness. When she finished, he was quiet for several heartbeats. "I live alone," he said finally. "My wife passed 3 years ago. I've been managing on my own since, but the place is running down. I need help, someone who can handle the house, the garden, the chickens, meal preparation. The work is hard and the days are long, especially in summer." Martha's heart began to beat faster. "I can handle hard work. It wouldn't be proper for you to live at the ranch house, unmarried and with children. There's a cabin about a quarter mile from the main house, 4 rooms, needs some fixing up, but it's sound. You and your children could stay there. I'd pay $20 a month plus room and board, with the understanding that you're working for the ranch, not for me personally." $20 a month. It wasn't much, but combined with room and board, it was survival. It was possibility. "There's also school," Caleb continued. "Starts up again in September. 1-room schoolhouse about 2 miles from the ranch. I can drive the children if the weather's bad." Martha felt something dangerous bloom in her chest, something that felt almost like hope. "When would you need me to start?" "Today, if you're willing. I'll drive you back to town to get your things and settle up wherever you're staying. We can load your children in the truck bed and be at the ranch before dark." She should ask more questions. About expectations. About boundaries. About what would happen if this arrangement didn't work out. But the sun was beating down mercilessly, and she had $3.30 to her name and 4 children who needed more than she could give them on her own. "I'm willing," she said. Caleb nodded once, as if something had been settled. "Let's go get your family then." The ride back to town was quiet. Caleb drove with the same economical efficiency he seemed to apply to everything else, and Martha watched the wheat fields roll past, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. At the boarding house, Mrs. Peterson looked surprised to see her back so soon with a man in tow. Martha settled her account, retrieved the children and their meager belongings, and made the introductions in the dusty yard. "These are my children, Ruth, James, Tommy, and Annie. Children, this is Mr. Rowan. We're going to be working at his ranch." The children looked at Caleb with varying degrees of curiosity and uncertainty. Tommy hid partially behind Ruth's skirt. Annie stared with wide eyes. James studied the truck with obvious interest. Caleb crouched down to James's level, bringing himself to eye height with the boy. "You ever ridden in a truck before?" James shook his head. "Well, you're about to. You and your brother can ride in the back. There's hay bales to sit on, but you have to hold on tight and look after each other." Can you do that? Yes, sir, James said, his voice gaining confidence. Good man. Caleb stood and looked at Ruth. You and your little sister can ride up front with your mother and me. It'll be cramped, but it's only a few miles. Ruth nodded solemnly, and Annie's small hand crept into Martha's. They loaded the suitcase and bags into the truck bed, and Caleb lifted the boys up with easy strength. Martha climbed into the cab with the girls, and they started west, leaving the town behind in a cloud of dust. The ranch revealed itself gradually, first fence lines, then pastures where cattle grazed in the shimmering heat, then outbuildings, and finally the main house itself. It was a solid structure, 2 stories, with a wide porch and windows that caught the late afternoon sun. Beyond it, Martha could see the smaller cabin Caleb had mentioned, weathered wood and a stone chimney. Caleb parked near the cabin and helped the children down from the truck bed. Let's get you settled first, then I'll show you around properly. The cabin was hot from being closed up all day, but it was clean and structurally sound. 4 rooms, a main living area with a fireplace, 2 small bedrooms, and a lean-to kitchen. The furniture was sparse but serviceable. A table with chairs, 2 iron bedsteads, a rocking chair, some shelves. I'll bring bedding from the main house, Caleb said. And anything else you need. There's a pump out back for water. It's good water, cold and clean. Martha walked through the rooms, touching the solid walls, noting the way evening light fell through the western windows. It wasn't much, but it was infinitely more than the streets, which was where they'd been headed. It's perfect, she said quietly. Thank you. Caleb's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he understood exactly how close to the edge she'd been. I'll let you get your children settled. Come up to the main house when you're ready, and I'll show you the rest. After he left, Martha stood in the center of the cabin's main room while her children explored with cautious excitement. Ruth appeared in the bedroom doorway, her face serious. Mama, are we really staying here? Yes, sweetheart. What if... Ruth hesitated. What if he's not a good man? Martha had wondered the same thing during the drive from town, but she thought of Caleb crouching down to speak to James eye to eye, of the calluses on his hands and the quietness in his voice, of the fact that he'd offered work without asking invasive questions about where they'd come from or why. I think he is, she said, but we'll be careful and watchful just the same, and if anything feels wrong, we'll leave. I promise you that. Ruth nodded, some of the tension leaving her thin shoulders. That evening, after Caleb had brought bedding and shown her the chicken coop, the garden, the root cellar, and the summer kitchen, Martha stood on the cabin's small porch and watched the sun set over the wheat fields. The heat was finally breaking, and a slight breeze carried the smell of dry grass and distant rain. Behind her, inside the cabin, her children were settling into their first real beds in months. Tomorrow, the work would begin in earnest. But tonight, for the first time since she'd walked away from her husband's rage and neglect, she allowed herself to breathe fully. They had shelter. They had work. They had a chance. It would have to be enough. The next morning began before dawn. Martha woke to darkness and the sound of a rooster's crow, her body protesting yesterday's walking and stress. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed quickly and quietly, not wanting to wake the children yet. Outside, the air was cool and fresh, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east. She found the pump Caleb had mentioned and worked the handle until cold water gushed out, splashing her face and hands. A light was already burning in the main house. Martha walked toward it, her stomach tight with nervousness. This was her first test. She needed to prove herself indispensable before Caleb could change his mind. She knocked softly on the kitchen door. "It's open," Caleb's voice called. The kitchen was large and functional, with a wood stove, a dry sink, open shelving, and a table that could seat 8. Caleb stood at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. The smell made Martha's mouth water. "I wasn't sure what time you'd be up," he said, glancing at her. "Coffee's ready if you want it." "Thank you, but I should be the one making breakfast." "Today you're a guest. Tomorrow you're an employee." He slid eggs onto 2 plates, added thick slices of bread, and set one in front of her. "Sit, eat." Martha sat, uncomfortable with being served, but too hungry to protest properly. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bread fresh. She ate slowly, trying not to reveal how desperately grateful she was for hot food. Caleb ate standing up, his back to the counter. I usually start the day with the animals. Chickens first, then checking the cattle, then whatever repair work needs doing. You'll handle the house, garden, and chickens moving forward. I'll show you the routine today, and you can adjust it however makes sense to you. What about cooking for you? I'm a simple man. Breakfast, something I can take with me for midday, and supper, nothing fancy. I like food hot and plentiful, but I'm not particular beyond that. Martha nodded. I can manage that. They worked through the morning together, Caleb showing her where things were kept, how he preferred things done, what needed immediate attention. The chickens were easy. She'd kept chickens before. The garden was overgrown but salvageable. The house itself was clean but bare, functional without any softness or comfort. A bachelor's house, missing a woman's touch. By midday, Martha had a mental inventory of everything that needed doing and a plan for tackling it systematically. Caleb left her to return to fence repairs, and she walked back to the cabin to check on the children. She found them awake and anxious, huddled together in the main room. It's all right, she soothed, gathering them close. Everything's fine. Come with me. I'll show you the chickens, and then we'll have lunch. The days developed a rhythm quickly. Martha rose before dawn, prepared breakfast, handled the chickens and garden, managed the house, cooked 3 meals a day, and fell into bed exhausted when darkness came. Ruth helped with the younger children and simple chores. James proved surprisingly capable with the chickens and carrying water. Even Tommy and Annie contributed what they could. Caleb was a quiet presence, working long hours, speaking little, but watching everything. Martha felt his assessment constantly, though he never criticized or corrected her. She worked as if her life depended on it, because it did. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The garden began producing in earnest, and Martha spent evenings preserving beans and tomatoes for winter. The house gradually acquired small touches of comfort. Curtains she sewed from fabric scraps, flowers on the table, bread that rose properly, and filled the kitchen with its warm smell. She was careful never to overstep, never to presume. This was Caleb's house, his ranch, his life. She was simply an employee, earning her keep. But sometimes, in the evening quiet after supper, when Caleb would sit on the porch with his coffee and she would work nearby, mending or shelling peas, there would be conversation. Small exchanges about the weather, the cattle, the children's adjustment, and Martha would feel something dangerous stirring, a sense of stability that terrified her because she knew how quickly everything could be taken away. It was during the 4th week, on a brutally hot afternoon, that the letter arrived. Martha was in the summer kitchen, her arms deep in bread dough, when she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. She wiped her hands and stepped outside to see an unfamiliar car parked near the main house. A man in a suit stood talking to Caleb. Even from a distance, Martha could see the tension in Caleb's posture. Her heart began to pound. The man in the suit turned and looked directly at her across the dusty yard. He said something to Caleb, then started walking toward the summer kitchen. Martha forced herself to stand still, to appear calm. Mrs. Hale? The man's voice was professional, impersonal. Yes. He extended an envelope. I'm required by law to deliver this to you personally. Martha took it with hands that wanted to shake. The return address made her blood run cold. A lawyer's office in Kansas. Her husband had found her. She waited until the man had driven away before opening it, her fingers clumsy with the seal. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was brutally clear. Her husband was suing for custody of the children. Full custody. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks from today. Her presence was required, or the case would be decided in her absence. The accusations were listed in cold, formal prose: abandonment, neglect, moral unfitness, inability to provide proper care. All lies. But lies told by a man with legal standing and social respectability against a woman who'd fled in the night with nothing but her children and desperation. Martha's vision swam. She gripped the edge of the work table, trying to breathe through the panic. Caleb's voice came from behind her, quiet and steady. Bad news? She couldn't speak. She simply handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his expression growing grimmer with each line. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back. What will you do? Martha forced herself to think past the fear. I have to go to the hearing. If I don't, I lose them automatically. But even if I go, her voice cracked. I have no legal standing. I left him. In the law's eyes, that makes me the one at fault. And I have nothing, no home of my own, no husband, no... She stopped abruptly, the full horror of her situation crashing down on her. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. There might be a way. Martha looked up at him through tears she was fighting to control. The law respects marriage and stability, Caleb said slowly. A married woman with a home and an income has better standing than... He hesitated. Than an abandoned woman living in charity, Martha finished bitterly. I wasn't going to put it that way. Caleb met her eyes directly. I was going to say better standing than a woman alone. But if you weren't alone, if you were married and settled with a home and employment, the situation would look different to a judge. Martha's heart stopped. Are you suggesting? A practical arrangement, Caleb said quietly. I need help running this place. You need legal protection and stability. We could marry, on paper, for practicality. Separate households, business arrangement. After the custody hearing, after things are settled, we could dissolve it quietly if you wanted. The offer hung in the hot summer air between them. It was insane. They barely knew each other. Marriage, even a practical one, was an enormous step. But the alternative was losing her children. Why would you do this? Martha whispered. Why would you risk so much for people who are nothing to you? Caleb looked away toward the wheat fields shimmering in the afternoon heat. My wife wanted children. We tried for years. It never happened. Before she died, she made me promise something. He paused. She said if I ever had the chance to help a child who needed it, I should take it, even if it cost me something. His gray eyes came back to Martha's face. You've got 4 children who need help. Seems like keeping a promise. Martha felt tears spill over despite her best efforts. It's too much to ask. You didn't ask. I'm offering. His voice was firm. But I need an answer soon if we're doing this. Legal proceedings take time. Martha thought of her children sleeping peacefully in the cabin, finally feeling safe. She thought of her husband's cruelty and manipulation. She thought of the long, desperate months of running. All right, she said. Yes. Caleb nodded once, as if something had been settled. I'll drive into town tomorrow and speak with a lawyer about what needs doing. We'll make this as solid as we can before that hearing. He walked away, leaving Martha standing in the summer kitchen, a letter full of threats in one hand and the fragile beginning of hope in the other. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the afternoon into something shimmering and surreal. Tomorrow, they would start building a legal defense. Tomorrow, they would begin the complicated process of becoming legally bound. But tonight, Martha had to tell her children that the father who'd hurt them was trying to take them back, and that the quiet rancher who'd given them shelter was offering something no one else had, a chance to fight back. That evening, after the sun had finally released its stranglehold on the day, and the air had cooled enough to breathe without effort, Martha sat her children down in the cabin's main room. The lamplight threw soft shadows on the walls, and outside, crickets had begun their nightly chorus. She had rehearsed what to say a dozen times in her mind, but now, looking at their faces, Ruth's guarded and knowing, James's curious, Tommy's sleepy, Annie's trusting, all her careful words dissolved. Your father has written to me, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He wants you to come live with him. The silence that followed was heavy and complete. Even the crickets seemed to pause. Ruth's face went pale. No. I'm not going to let that happen, Martha said quickly. But I need you to understand what we're facing. There will be a court hearing. A judge will decide. And I have to be honest with you, the law doesn't always favor mothers who leave, even when they have good reasons. We're not going back. Ruth's voice was fierce, trembling. Mama, we can't. I know. Martha reached for her daughter's hand, gripping it tightly. I know what he is. I know what he did. That's why we're going to fight this with everything we have. James leaned forward, his 9-year-old face serious beyond his years. How do we fight it? Martha took a breath. This was the part she'd been dreading. Mr. Rowan has offered to help us. He's offered to marry me, not for love, but for legal protection. If I'm married with a stable home, the judge will see things differently. It's a business arrangement, nothing more. Ruth's eyes widened. Tommy, who had been half asleep against her shoulder, suddenly looked alert. Annie's small voice piped up. Is Mr. Rowan going to be our papa now? No, sweetheart. He's going to be someone who helps us stay together. Your father will always be your father, but that doesn't mean you have to live with him. I don't want father to be my father, Tommy said, his voice small but definite. He was mean. Martha pulled him close, feeling the weight of all the things her children had witnessed, all the fear they'd carried. I know he was, and I'm sorry I didn't protect you from that sooner, but I'm protecting you now. Ruth was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. Mr. Rowan seems kind. He doesn't yell. He doesn't hit. No, he doesn't. Then if marrying him keeps us safe, I think you should do it. The simple, mature acceptance in her daughter's voice broke something in Martha's chest. Ruth was 12 years old. She should have been worrying about dolls and school lessons, not legal battles and protective marriages. We'll get through this, Martha promised, looking at each of their faces in turn. All of us together. I need you to be brave a little while longer. We can be brave, Mama, James said. We've been brave this long. After the children had finally settled into sleep, Martha sat alone on the cabin's porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cooling night air. The sky was vast and clear, stars scattered like salt across black cloth. She could see the main house in the distance, a single lamp burning in what she knew was the kitchen. Footsteps crunched on gravel, and Caleb's form materialized out of the darkness. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, keeping a respectful distance. Couldn't sleep either? He asked quietly. Too much to think about. Did you tell them? Yes. Ruth understands more than I'd like. The younger ones just know their father wants to take them, and they don't want to go. Caleb was silent for a moment. I went into town this afternoon after the lawyer left. Spoke with John Brennan. He handles most of the legal work around here. Good man, honest. He'll help us. What did he say? Said we need to move quickly. Get married within the week, establish you as my legal wife before the custody hearing. He'll file the paperwork, make sure everything's documented properly. He also said, Caleb hesitated. He said your husband's lawyer is known for being ruthless. We should expect them to challenge everything. The marriage, your fitness as a mother, my character. They'll try to make it look fraudulent. Martha's stomach tightened. Then we need to make it look real. How real are you comfortable with? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Martha chose her words carefully. Real enough to convince a judge. I won't ask you to pretend affection you don't feel, but I can play the part of a respectful wife if you can play the part of a protective husband. I can do that. Caleb shifted his weight, and in the starlight, Martha could see the tension in his shoulders. There's something else. Brennan said it would help if you moved into the main house. Married couples living separately will raise questions. Of course it would. Martha had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that frightened her. The house has 4 bedrooms upstairs, Caleb continued. You and the girls could take the 2 on the east side. Boys could have the room next to mine on the west. There's space enough for everyone to have privacy. And us? Martha asked quietly. Separate rooms, separate lives, except when appearance requires otherwise. Caleb's voice was firm. I'm not asking for anything beyond what we've agreed to. This is about protecting your children, not about my needs or wants. Martha felt a rush of gratitude so strong it made her eyes sting. Thank you for understanding, for all of it. Don't thank me yet. We've got a hard road ahead. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, the wind through the wheat, an owl hunting somewhere beyond the barn. Can I ask you something? Martha finally said. Go ahead. Why do you live out here alone? You're not that old. You could find another wife, a real one. Have the family you wanted. Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was distant. I loved my wife, Sarah. We were married 14 years. I'm not interested in trying to replace her. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have pried. It's a fair question. He stood, preparing to leave. We should marry on Saturday. That gives Brennan time to file the papers and gives us 6 weeks before your hearing, enough time to establish the marriage as legitimate. Saturday. Martha repeated. 3 days away. 3 days until she became a married woman again, bound to a man she barely knew, gambling everything on his integrity. Get some sleep if you can, Caleb said. Morning comes early. He walked back toward the main house, his figure gradually swallowed by darkness. Martha sat alone under the stars and tried to imagine herself as Mrs. Caleb Rowan. Tried to picture her children living in that big house, eating at that long table, sleeping in rooms with real beds and solid walls. Tried not to think about all the ways this desperate plan could fail. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. John Brennan came out to the ranch twice, bringing papers to sign and explaining the legal strategy in detail. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a straightforward manner that Martha found reassuring. The key is establishing normalcy, he explained, seated at Caleb's kitchen table with documents spread before him. When we go before the judge, we need to show that you have a stable marriage, a good home, and the means to care for your children. Your husband's lawyer will argue that you abandoned your marriage and took the children unlawfully. We'll counter that you fled an abusive situation and have since established a proper household. Will we need witnesses? Martha asked. People to testify that the marriage is real? It won't hurt. Neighbors, townspeople who've seen you together. The longer you're married before the hearing, the more credible it becomes. Brennan looked between Martha and Caleb. I have to ask, is there any chance of reconciliation with your former husband? Any possibility this could be settled without court? Martha's laugh was sharp and humorless. No, he doesn't want the children out of love, Mr. Brennan. He wants them because I took them, and he can't stand losing. Brennan nodded, unsurprised. Then we prepare for battle. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at the courthouse in town. No ceremony, no celebration, just a legal proceeding witnessed by John Brennan and the county clerk. Martha had nothing appropriate to wear, but Ruth helped her press her navy dress and pin her hair neatly. You look pretty, Mama, Annie said, watching from the bed. Martha studied her reflection in the small mirror and saw a thin woman with worry lines beginning to etch themselves around her eyes and mouth. Pretty seemed like a generous assessment. Thank you, sweetheart. Caleb drove them into town in the ranch truck. The children crowded into the cab with their mother. He wore clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his hair still damp from washing. Martha noticed he'd shaved carefully, and the smell of soap clung to him. The courthouse was a brick building on the town square, imposing in its official solemnity. Inside, the clerk's office was small and stuffy, filled with filing cabinets and the smell of old paper. The ceremony itself took less than 10 minutes. The clerk, a severe woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun, read the words in a monotone voice. Martha repeated her vows, her voice steady. Caleb did the same, his gray eyes serious as he looked at her. Do you have a ring? The clerk asked. Martha hadn't even thought about rings. But Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. He slid it onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but it stayed in place. I, Caleb James Rowan, take you, Martha Ann Hale, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I, Martha Ann Hale, take you, Caleb James Rowan, to be my lawfully wedded husband. The clerk pronounced them married. John Brennan signed as witness. And just like that, Martha's entire legal identity shifted. She was no longer Martha Hale. She was Martha Rowan. On the drive back to the ranch, Ruth broke the silence. Are we Rowans now too? Martha glanced at Caleb, uncertain. He kept his eyes on the road. Legally, you'll keep your father's surname until the custody matter is settled. After that, if you wanted to take my name, we could arrange it. I want to be Ruth Rowan, Ruth said firmly. I don't want his name anymore. James nodded agreement. Even Tommy, who understood less of the legal complexities, said quietly, Me too. Caleb's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but his voice remained calm. We'll see what the judge says. One step at a time. That evening, they moved into the main house. It took several trips to carry all their belongings from the cabin, but by nightfall, the children's clothes were hung in the upstairs wardrobes, and Martha's few possessions were arranged in the east bedroom that was now, officially, hers. The room was larger than any she'd had before, with windows facing the wheat fields and a bed that looked impossibly comfortable. A wedding night bed, she thought with dark humor, that would be occupied by only one person. Downstairs, she found Caleb in the kitchen, preparing a simple supper of cold meat and bread. The children were exploring the house with subdued excitement, their voices echoing in the unfamiliar spaces. "I'll take over cooking starting tomorrow," Martha said. "No rush. You've had a long day." "So have you." She moved to help him, and they worked in companionable silence, setting the table, slicing bread, pouring milk for the children. When they all sat down together for the first time as a household, Martha looked around the table and felt the strangeness of it settle over her like a weight. Her children, eating at a rancher's table. A gold ring on her finger that symbolized protection rather than love. A man who was now legally her husband, but remained essentially a stranger. "This is good bread," James said, breaking the awkward quiet. "Your mother made it 2 days ago," Caleb replied. "She's a fine baker." It was such a small, ordinary compliment, but Martha felt color rise in her cheeks. "Thank you." After supper, the children helped clear the dishes, and Martha supervised bedtime routines in the upstairs rooms. Tommy and Annie shared the smallest bedroom, their excitement at having real beds of their own finally overcoming their exhaustion. James had his own room for the first time in his life and seemed uncertain whether to be pleased or lonely. Ruth helped Martha tuck in the younger ones, then stood in the hallway looking uncertain. "Your room is just down the hall from mine," Martha said softly. "If you need anything in the night, I'm right there." "Where's Mr. Rowan's room?" "The other end of the hall. He gave us the east side for privacy." Ruth nodded slowly. "He's being very kind, isn't he?" "Yes, he is." "Mama?" Ruth's voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you think Father will really try to take us back?" Martha pulled her daughter close. "He'll try, but we're going to fight him with everything we have, and now we have the law on our side too. Because you're married. Because we're a family now, on paper at least, and sometimes paper is enough to make things real." After Ruth had finally gone to bed, Martha descended the stairs to find Caleb sitting on the front porch, his coffee cup cooling in his hands. The evening air was finally bearable, and the sky was fading from gold to purple. "They settled in all right?" he asked without turning. "Yes, they're overwhelmed but happy." Martha sat in the rocking chair beside his. "This is a lot for them to process." "It's a lot for all of us." They sat in silence, watching the sunset paint the wheat fields in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, and the cattle answered with low, rumbling sounds. "Your wife," Martha said carefully. "Sarah. What was she like?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Strong, practical. She could outwork most men I knew, and she never complained about the hardships of ranch life. She loved this place." He paused. "She would have liked your children, especially Ruth. She has that same quiet strength Sarah had." "I'm sorry you lost her. Life takes what it takes. We don't get to choose what we keep." Martha thought of all the things life had taken from her, her innocence, her first dreams of what marriage would be, her sense of safety. But it had also, strangely, given her this: a house on a Colorado ranch, 4 children sleeping soundly upstairs, and a quiet man who'd offered protection when no one else would. "Thank you," she said softly. "For the ring. I know it must have been hers." Caleb nodded. Seemed right. She'd have wanted it used for something good. The words settled over Martha like a benediction, and she felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, unwilling to burden this man with more emotion than he'd already taken on. The weeks that followed established new rhythms. Martha rose early to prepare breakfast, pack lunches for Caleb's long days of ranch work, and manage the household tasks that had been neglected during his years alone. She scrubbed floors, beat rugs, washed windows until they gleamed. The children helped where they could, learning the patterns of ranch life. Caleb treated them with the same quiet respect he showed Martha, never raising his voice, always patient with their mistakes, offering praise when they did well. He taught James how to properly stack hay bales and showed him the difference between cattle breeds. He let Tommy help gather eggs, even when the boy moved slowly and broke one occasionally. He carved Annie a small wooden horse that she carried everywhere. And with Ruth, he was especially careful. Martha noticed how he always asked her opinion, how he listened when she spoke, how he made space for her to be both child and adult as the situation required. "You're good with them," Martha said one evening after the children had gone to bed. They were in the kitchen, Martha washing dishes while Caleb dried. It had become their routine, a quiet half hour at the end of each day when they worked side by side and sometimes talked. They're good children. You've raised them well under difficult circumstances. I've done my best, but it hasn't always been enough. Caleb set down the plate he was drying and looked at her directly. Martha, you walked away from an abusive marriage with 4 children and nothing but determination. You kept them safe, fed, and together through God knows what kind of hardship. That's not doing your best. That's being extraordinary. Martha's hands stilled in the dishwater. No one had ever called her extraordinary before. Foolish, yes. Irresponsible, certainly. Unfeminine, unsubmissive, selfish. She'd heard all those words. But extraordinary? I ran away, she said quietly. Some would say that's cowardice. Some would be wrong. Caleb's voice was firm. Running towards safety for your children takes more courage than staying in a situation that was destroying all of you. Martha turned back to the dishes, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. Thank you for saying that. They fell back into silence, but it felt different now, warmer somehow, less guarded. 2 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived from John Brennan. The custody hearing had been scheduled for August 15th, exactly 4 weeks away. Martha's husband had filed additional documents claiming she had been mentally unstable, had neglected the children's education, and had exposed them to immoral circumstances by living with a man before marriage. All lies, but lies that would need to be refuted with evidence. We need character witnesses, Brennan explained when he came out to the ranch to discuss strategy. People who can testify to your stability, your care for the children, the legitimacy of your marriage to Caleb. Who would speak for me? Martha asked. I've only been here a few weeks. I barely know anyone in town. Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house saw you with the children, Caleb said. Grace at the diner, the clerk who married us. They can testify that you were clearly caring for your children, that you were seeking honest work, that the marriage was properly conducted. Brennan nodded. And Caleb, you'll need to testify about the conditions under which Martha came to work for you and why you chose to marry her. Be honest, but strategic. The judge needs to see this as a legitimate relationship, not a convenient fiction. It is legitimate, Caleb said quietly. Maybe not romantic, but it's real. She's my wife, and those children are under my protection now. That's not fiction. Something in Martha's chest tightened at the conviction in his voice. Over the following weeks, they prepared. Brennan coached Martha on how to answer questions, how to remain calm under hostile cross-examination, how to present herself as a stable, capable mother. He warned her that opposing counsel would try to rattle her to make her seem emotional or unstable. They'll bring up the fact that you left your husband, Brennan said. They'll try to paint it as abandonment rather than escape. You need to be ready to explain, calmly and clearly, why you felt you had no choice. Martha practiced her testimony until the words felt wooden in her mouth. She recounted incidents she'd tried to forget, her husband's rages, the times he'd struck her in front of the children, the night he'd grabbed James by the throat, and she'd known with sudden, cold clarity that staying would eventually cost someone their life. Caleb listened to these rehearsals with a face like granite, his jaw tight and his eyes hard. Once, when she described her husband throwing a lamp at her head while Annie screamed in her crib, he stood abruptly and walked out of the room. Martha found him later on the porch, his hands gripping the railing with white-knuckled force. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know it's difficult to hear. How did you survive it? His voice was rough. How did you keep going, keep protecting them, keep... He stopped, shaking his head. I can't imagine the strength it took. You do what you must. For your children, you find strength you didn't know you had. Caleb turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Anger, yes, but also profound respect. When we go before that judge, I want you to know something. I'm not just testifying because Brennan says I should. I'm testifying because what your husband did was wrong, and he doesn't deserve those children. You do. Martha felt her throat tighten. Caleb, let me finish. He moved closer, his voice intense. I know this marriage started as a legal convenience, but somewhere over these past weeks, it's become more than that to me. Not romance. I'm not asking for that. But partnership, respect. Those children are thriving here. You're thriving here. and I'll stand up in court and tell that judge exactly that, because it's the truth." Martha couldn't speak past the emotion lodging in her throat. She simply nodded, hoping he could see the gratitude in her eyes. The night before they were scheduled to leave for the hearing, Martha couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed listening to the house settle around her, thinking about all the things that could go wrong tomorrow. The judge might not believe them. Her husband's lawyer might be more persuasive. The fact that she'd fled might outweigh everything else. She might lose her children. The thought sent panic racing through her chest, and she sat up, pressing her hands to her face, trying to breathe through it. A soft knock came at her door. "Martha, you all right?" Caleb's voice, quiet and concerned. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway in his nightshirt, his hair disheveled from sleep. "I heard you moving around. Thought you might be ill." "Just anxious about tomorrow." He nodded, understanding. "I couldn't sleep either. Was thinking of making coffee. Want some?" They sat at the kitchen table in the lamplight, drinking coffee neither of them really wanted, while the clock ticked toward dawn. "What if it's not enough?" Martha whispered. "What if the judge doesn't believe us? Then we appeal. We keep fighting. But Martha—" Caleb reached across the table and took her hand, the first truly intimate gesture he'd made since their wedding. "We're not going to lose. We have the truth on our side, and we have each other. That counts for something." Martha looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and strong, hers worn from work but steady. The gold ring on her finger caught the lamplight. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "I know, but you're also the bravest person I've ever met. You're going to walk into that courtroom tomorrow, and you're going to tell your truth, and that judge is going to see what I see, a woman who would move heaven and earth for her children. And you'll be there, every minute, right beside you." They sat in silence until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the kitchen windows. Then Caleb squeezed her hand once and stood. "Get some rest if you can. We leave at 8. Martha went back upstairs and managed a few hours of fitful sleep. When she woke, Ruth was already up, helping the younger children dress in their best clothes. They would come to the hearing. Brennan had said the judge would want to see them, might even speak to them privately. The drive to town seemed both endless and far too short. Martha sat in the truck's cab with Caleb while the children rode in back and tried to calm the racing of her heart. This was it. Everything they'd built over the past 6 weeks would be tested today. The courthouse was the same brick building where she'd married Caleb, but today it felt ominous rather than official. Inside, John Brennan met them in the hallway, his expression serious. "They're already here. Your husband and his lawyer. They're in the courtroom." Martha's stomach dropped. She wasn't ready to see him, wasn't ready to face the man who'd made her life a misery for so many years. But Caleb's hand found hers, steady and warm. "You can do this." She nodded, squared her shoulders, and walked through the courtroom doors to fight for her children's future. The courtroom was smaller than Martha had imagined, with wooden benches worn smooth by decades of anxious hands and high windows that let in bars of harsh August sunlight. The air was thick and still despite the early hour, and Martha could smell old wood, leather-bound law books, and her own fear. Her husband sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. When Martha walked in, her husband turned to look at her, and for a moment their eyes met across the room. He looked prosperous, new suit, fresh haircut, the picture of respectability. His expression was one of wounded righteousness, as if she were the villain in this story. Martha's hands trembled, but she forced herself to keep walking, to take her seat beside John Brennan at the defense table. Caleb sat directly behind her, close enough that she could hear his steady breathing. The children were in the hallway with a court officer who would bring them in when needed. Judge Harrison entered, and everyone rose. He was an older man with silver hair and a face carved by time into an expression of permanent skepticism. He took his seat, arranged papers on his desk, and looked down at the assembled parties with eyes that missed nothing. "This is a custody hearing in the matter of Hale versus Rowan," he began, his voice carrying authority that needed no volume. "Mr. Whitmore, you're representing the plaintiff." The sharp-faced lawyer stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Robert Whitmore, representing Mr. Daniel Hale in his petition for full custody of his 4 minor children." "And Mr. Brennan for the defendant?" "Yes, Your Honor. John Brennan, representing Mrs. Martha Rowan, née Hale. The judge made a note. Let's proceed. Mr. Whitmore, present your case. Whitmore stood and immediately launched into an attack that took Martha's breath away with its calculated cruelty. He painted her as an unstable woman who had abandoned her lawful marriage without cause, kidnapped 4 children in the dead of night, and subjected them to months of wandering and deprivation before opportunistically marrying a stranger to avoid legal consequences. The evidence will show, Your Honor, that Mrs. Rowan, or Mrs. Hale, as she was known during her legal marriage, acted with willful disregard for her children's welfare. She removed them from a stable home, from their father who loved them, from their school and community. She dragged them across state lines with no plan, no resources, and no thought for their well-being beyond her own selfish desires. Martha felt Brennan's warning hand on her arm as anger surged through her. Selfish desires. As if protecting her children from violence was selfishness. Whitmore called Daniel Hale to the stand. Martha watched her husband walk forward, his hand raised to swear the oath, his face arranged in an expression of pained concern. He was a good actor. He'd always been a good actor in public. Mr. Hale, Whitmore began, please tell the court about your marriage to the defendant. We were married for 13 years, Daniel said, his voice measured and sad. I thought we were happy. I worked hard to provide for my family. I'm a bookkeeper for a mercantile company. Steady employment, good wages. We had a decent house. The children were enrolled in school. I never imagined Martha would leave. Did you give her cause to leave? Absolutely not. We had disagreements like any married couple, but nothing that warranted her running away with my children in the middle of the night. The lie was delivered so smoothly that Martha almost doubted her own memories. But then she remembered James's terrified face when his father had grabbed him, remembered the bruises on her own arms, remembered the sound of breaking glass, and Tommy's crying. When did you discover they were gone? Whitmore asked. June 3rd. I came home from work and the house was empty. She'd taken the children, some clothes, and left no note. No explanation. I was frantic. I contacted the police, but they said it wasn't kidnapping if a mother took her own children. I hired investigators to track her down, which took months. Months of not knowing if my children were safe, if they were being fed, if they were alive. His voice broke convincingly on the last word. Martha wanted to stand up and scream the truth, but Brennan's hand tightened on her arm. And when you finally located them? They were living on a ranch in Colorado with a man named Caleb Rowan, a man my wife had apparently married with unseemly haste. It was clear to me that this marriage was a legal maneuver, nothing more, an attempt to gain respectability and avoid the consequences of her actions. Whitmore nodded sympathetically. What do you seek from this court, Mr. Hale? I want my children back. I want them in a stable home with their father, in the community where they belong. I want them to receive proper education and moral guidance, and I want my wife to face consequences for what she's done. When Brennan stood for cross-examination, Martha felt a flicker of hope. Brennan was calm and methodical, not flashy like Whitmore, but there was steel underneath. Mr. Hale, you testified that you provided a stable home for your family. How would you characterize your relationship with your children? I love them very much. I've always been a devoted father. And your relationship with your wife? I loved her too. I still do, despite everything. Did you ever strike your wife, Mr. Hale? Daniel's expression remained sorrowful. Never. I'm not a violent man, Mr. Brennan. If Martha has claimed otherwise, she's lying. Did you ever strike your children? I disciplined them when necessary, as any father does, but I never abused them. What constitutes necessary discipline in your view? A firm hand. Children need structure and consequences, but always within reason. Brennan pulled a paper from his file. Mr. Hale, I have a statement here from a neighbor in Kansas, a Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard. She states that on multiple occasions she heard shouting from your home, the sound of breaking objects and children crying. She states that she once saw your wife with a visible bruise on her face. How do you account for that? Whitmore stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay from a witness not present in this courtroom. Sustained, Judge Harrison said. Mr. Brennan, if you have witnesses, you need to produce them. We attempted to secure Mrs. Pritchard's presence, Your Honor, but she was unable to travel due to illness. We have her sworn affidavit. An affidavit is not cross-examination. I'll allow it as supplementary evidence, but it carries limited weight. Continue. Brennan shifted tactics. Mr. Hale, why do you believe your wife left? I honestly don't know. She became increasingly unstable over the past year, emotional, irrational. I worried about her mental state, but I never thought she would do something like this. Unstable in what way? Crying without reason, refusing to fulfill her wifely duties, making wild accusations. I tried to be patient with her, but clearly she needed help I couldn't provide. Martha dug her fingernails into her palms to keep from reacting. Wifely duties, wild accusations, the sanitized language of a man rewriting history. Brennan pressed on for another 20 minutes, but Daniel had clearly been coached well. He admitted nothing, presented himself as the wounded party, and made Martha sound like an erratic woman who'd stolen his children on a whim. When Daniel finally stepped down, Martha felt despair settling over her like a shroud. Whitmore called 2 more witnesses, a colleague of Daniel's who testified to his character and stability, and a former neighbor who said she'd never witnessed any violence and had always seen Daniel as a caring father. Both were brief and damning in their respectability. Then it was Brennan's turn. He called Martha to the stand. She walked forward on legs that felt disconnected from her body, raised her hand, swore to tell the truth. The whole truth. The bailiff's words echoed in her ears as she took her seat. Brennan approached her gently. Mrs. Rowan, please tell the court why you left your marriage to Daniel Hale. Martha took a breath and forced herself to speak clearly. I left because I feared for my children's safety and my own. My husband has a violent temper. When he drinks, which is often, he becomes dangerous. I stayed as long as I could, hoping he would change, but when he put his hands on my son's throat, I knew we had to leave. Can you describe that incident? It was late May. Daniel came home drunk and angry. James had accidentally broken a plate while washing dishes. Daniel grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. James couldn't breathe. I had to physically intervene to make him stop. That night I knew if we stayed, eventually, he would kill one of us. Did you report this to the police? No, I was afraid. Daniel always apologized afterward, always promised it wouldn't happen again. And I had nowhere to go, no money of my own. I'd been a wife and mother for 13 years. I had no skills, no employment, no way to support 4 children alone. What changed? I found money hidden in the house, money Daniel had been saving for himself. I took it, packed what we could carry, and left before he came home from work. I knew he would try to stop us if I confronted him directly. Whitmore was on his feet immediately for cross-examination, and his expression was predatory. Mrs. Rowan, or should I call you Mrs. Hale, since that's your legal name from your actual marriage? I'm legally Mrs. Rowan now. Ah, yes, the convenient marriage. We'll get to that. Mrs. Hale, you testified that your husband was violent, yet you have no police reports, no medical records, no documentation of any kind to support these accusations. I was afraid. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Or perhaps there was nothing to report because these incidents never happened. They happened. You also testified that you took money from your husband's savings. You stole from him, in other words. I took what I needed to keep my children safe. How much did you take? Martha hesitated. About $200? $200? Whitmore's voice dripped with contempt. You stole $200, kidnapped 4 children, and fled across state lines. That sounds less like a frightened woman and more like a calculating thief. I didn't steal. I took what I needed to survive. And where did this survival take you? Through how many towns and cities before you landed in Colorado? We went to several places looking for work. How did you support your children during this time? We lived on the money I'd taken until I could find employment. So you wandered aimlessly with 4 children, burning through stolen money until you ran out of options and attached yourself to the first man who would take you in? Brennan objected, but Whitmore's point had been made. Martha could see it in the judge's expression, doubt creeping in. Let's talk about this marriage, Whitmore continued. You met Caleb Rowan in July, correct? Yes? And you married him in August? Yes. That's rather quick, wouldn't you say? Especially for a woman fleeing an abusive marriage. Most women in that situation would be wary of rushing into another commitment. It wasn't like that. Caleb offered me work, and when my husband's legal petition arrived, he offered to help. By marrying you. How convenient. Did you love him when you married him? Martha's throat tightened. No, not then. Do you love him now? She looked past Whitmore to where Caleb sat, his gray eyes steady on hers. I respect him deeply. I'm grateful to him. Love takes many forms. That's not what I asked. Do you love your husband in the way a wife should love a husband? Objection, Brennan said. The question is irrelevant to the custody matter. It goes to the legitimacy of the marriage, Your Honor, Whitmore argued. I'll allow it, Judge Harrison said. Answer the question, Mrs. Rowan. Martha met Whitmore's eyes. Our marriage may not be conventional, but it's real. Caleb has shown me and my children more kindness in 2 months than their father showed in 13 years. That's what matters. Whitmore smiled coldly. Your Honor, this woman has admitted to a marriage of convenience entered into solely to avoid legal consequences. She's admitted to stealing from her lawful husband and removing his children without his knowledge or consent. She's admitted to having no real affection for the man she claims is now her husband. I submit that the children should be returned to their father, who can provide them with a stable, proper home. He sat down, and Martha felt her carefully constructed defense crumbling. Brennan called Caleb to the stand next. Caleb walked forward with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything, raised his hand, and swore the oath. When he sat, his eyes found Martha's, and she saw reassurance there. Mr. Rowan, Brennan began, please tell the court how you met Martha Hale. She approached me on the road outside town. She was looking for work. She had 4 children with her and nowhere to go. What was your impression of her? That she was desperate but dignified. She didn't beg or make excuses. She simply asked for a chance to prove herself. Why did you hire her? I needed help. My ranch was running down without a woman's hand. She said she could cook, clean, manage a household. I believed her. And did she fulfill those duties? Better than I expected. She worked harder than any hired hand I've ever had. Her children helped without complaint. Within 2 weeks, the place looked better than it had in years. When did you decide to marry her? Caleb's expression grew serious. When the legal papers arrived from her husband. She showed me the petition, and I could see she was terrified. Not for herself, for her children. I knew enough about the law to know that a married woman with a stable home would have better standing than a single woman with nothing. So I offered. Did you have feelings for her at that time? I had respect for her. She'd survived things I couldn't imagine and kept her children safe. That kind of strength deserves respect. And now? Caleb paused, and when he spoke, his voice was measured but firm. Now I consider her my wife in every meaningful way. We may not have married for romance, but we've built something real. Those children are thriving under our care. That's not a marriage of convenience. That's a partnership. Whitmore's cross-examination was brutal, but Caleb didn't waver. He admitted the marriage had been quick, admitted it had been motivated by legal concerns, but refused to characterize it as fraudulent. Mr. Rowan, isn't it true that you're financially benefiting from this arrangement? You get a housekeeper and a ready-made family without the messy business of actual courtship? I pay Martha wages for her work. The marriage protects her legally. There's no dishonesty in that. But you're not truly husband and wife in the biblical sense. Caleb's expression hardened. That's between my wife and me. It has no bearing on our ability to care for her children. Doesn't it? This court needs to determine whether these children are in a proper moral household. A marriage in name only hardly seems proper. What's improper, Caleb said quietly, is a man who terrorizes his family claiming the moral high ground. What's improper is questioning the validity of a marriage that's brought stability and safety to 4 children who desperately needed both. You can question our motivations all you want, but you can't question the results. Those children are healthy, happy, and safe. That's what proper looks like. The courtroom fell silent after that declaration. Even Whitmore seemed momentarily at a loss. Brennan called Grace from the diner and Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house, both of whom testified to Martha's care for her children and her desperate search for honest work. He called the county clerk who had married them, who confirmed the marriage was legally valid and properly conducted. But Martha could see the doubt in Judge Harrison's eyes. Everything Whitmore had said was technically true. She had taken the children without permission. She had married quickly. The relationship wasn't conventional. The law cared about legality, not nuance. Finally, the judge called for a recess to speak with the children privately. Martha watched as Ruth, James, Tommy, and Annie were led into the judge's chambers. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Everything depended on what they said, how they presented themselves, whether the judge could see past their father's lies to the truth. The wait felt endless. Caleb moved to sit beside her, and this time he took her hand openly, in full view of everyone in the courtroom. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we'll face it together." Martha couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just gripped his hand and prayed. 45 minutes later, the children emerged. Ruth's face was pale but composed. James looked shaken. Tommy had been crying. Annie clung to Ruth's hand. They returned to their seats, and Judge Harrison emerged from his chambers, his expression unreadable. "I've spoken with the children," he said. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony. This is a complicated case with valid points on both sides." Martha's stomach dropped. "Mr. Hale presents as a stable, employed man seeking custody of his children. Mrs. Rowan presents as a woman who fled what she claims was an abusive situation. There is no police record of abuse, no medical documentation. However," he paused, and Martha held her breath. "However, the children's testimony was consistent and compelling. All 4 children, questioned separately, described incidents of violence that align with Mrs. Rowan's account. The eldest child, Ruth, age 12, was particularly credible. She described specific events, with details no child could fabricate. The younger children showed signs of genuine fear when asked about returning to their father." Daniel's lawyer started to object, but Judge Harrison raised his hand. "I'm not finished. While Mrs. Rowan's decision to leave without legal process was irregular, I find her explanation, that she feared for her safety and had no resources, to be credible. The subsequent marriage to Mr. Rowan, while quick, appears to be legitimate based on the testimony I've heard. Mr. Rowan has provided a stable home, and the children are clearly thriving." Martha felt tears starting to blur her vision. "That said, Mr. Hale is still the children's legal father, and that carries weight. I'm not prepared to terminate his parental rights entirely." Martha's hope crumbled. "Therefore, my ruling is as follows. Primary custody will remain with Mrs. Martha Rowan and her husband, Caleb Rowan, who will be recognized as the children's legal guardian. The children will reside at the Rowan Ranch and continue their education there." Martha's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Mr. Hale will be granted limited visitation rights, 1 weekend per month, supervised for the first 6 months. If he completes a course of counseling and demonstrates consistent, appropriate behavior, unsupervised visitation may be reconsidered. Full custody will be reviewed in 1 year." The judge's gavel came down with finality. Martha couldn't breathe. They'd won. Not completely, not perfectly, but they'd won. Caleb's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her as she sagged against him. Across the courtroom, Daniel's face was red with fury, and Whitmore was already gathering papers, clearly planning an appeal. But for now, in this moment, her children were safe. The children rushed to her as soon as the judge left, and Martha gathered them close, all 4 of them pressing against her in a tangle of arms and tears and relief. "We get to stay?" Tommy asked, his voice muffled against her dress. "Yes, sweetheart. We get to stay." Ruth was crying silently, her thin shoulders shaking. James looked dazed. Annie just held on tight. Caleb stood slightly apart, giving them space, but Martha reached for his hand and pulled him into their circle. "We get to stay," she repeated, looking up at him. "All of us." For the first time since she'd known him, Caleb's composure cracked. His eyes were suspiciously bright, and his voice was rough when he spoke. "Let's go home." The drive back to the ranch was subdued. The children dozed in the truck bed, exhausted from stress and emotion. Martha sat beside Caleb in the cab, watching the wheat fields roll past in the late afternoon light. "Supervised visitation," she said quietly. "That means he'll still be in their lives. It's better than the alternative. And if he doesn't complete the counseling, even that might go away. He won't. He'll do the bare minimum to maintain his rights, but he won't actually change. Then in a year, when the custody is reviewed, his lack of progress will work against him. Caleb glanced at her. You won, Martha. Maybe not as completely as you wanted, but you won. Martha nodded, letting herself feel the truth of it. She had her children, she had a home, she had a husband who'd stood beside her and fought for them all. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she was a young bride full of romantic dreams, but it was real. And it was hers, and it was enough. When they arrived at the ranch, the sun was setting in spectacular shades of gold and crimson. The children piled out of the truck and ran toward the house, their energy suddenly returning now that they were on familiar ground. Martha started to follow, but Caleb caught her hand. Wait, he said. She turned to face him in the fading light. His expression was serious, uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. In the courtroom, he said slowly, Whitmore asked if you loved me. You said our marriage was real but different. I want you to know you don't owe me anything beyond what we agreed to. The custody battle is over. If you want to maintain separate lives, separate households even, I'll understand. Martha looked at this man who had saved them, who had offered protection without asking for anything in return, who had stood in court and called her his wife with conviction and pride. What if I don't want separate lives? She asked quietly. Caleb's expression shifted, hope warring with caution. What are you saying? I'm saying that when Whitmore asked if I loved you, I wasn't entirely honest. I don't love you the way I thought I loved my first husband when I was 18 and foolish. But I love your steadiness. I love your kindness to my children. I love the way you make me feel safe for the first time in years. She paused. Maybe that's not romance, but maybe it's something better. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Sarah and I had romance. We had passion. It was good, and I loved her. But toward the end, what mattered most was partnership. Working together, trusting each other, building something that would last. He reached up and touched Martha's face gently. I think we could have that, if you want it. I want it, Martha whispered. He kissed her then, careful and respectful, a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, Martha was smiling through tears. Come on, Caleb said, taking her hand. Our children are waiting. Our children? The word settled over Martha like a blessing. They walked into the house together, hand in hand, and found the children in the kitchen, already raiding the pantry for bread and jam. Ruth looked up when they entered, and something in Martha's expression must have given away what had just happened, because her daughter smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in months. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Martha stood at her bedroom window looking out over the ranch. The same wheat fields that had shimmered with threatening heat weeks ago now glowed silver under the moon. The same land that had seemed harsh and unforgiving now felt like shelter. A soft knock came at her door, and Caleb appeared, looking uncertain. I thought you might want company, he said. But if you'd rather be alone, stay, Martha said. They sat together in the window seat, watching the night settle over their land, and talked until the sky began to lighten. They talked about the children's future, about the ranch, about all the small practical matters that made up a shared life. They talked about their pasts, Caleb's years with Sarah, Martha's slow realization that her first marriage was destroying her. And gradually, as dawn approached, they built the foundation of something new. Not the passionate romance of youth, but something steadier, something that might actually last. When the rooster crowed and the new day began, Martha Rowan was no longer a woman running from her past. She was a woman building her future, one honest conversation at a time. The weeks following the custody hearing brought changes to the ranch that were both subtle and profound. The children moved through the house with a new lightness, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Ruth smiled more often. James laughed at supper. Tommy stopped having nightmares that woke the whole household. Even Annie, who had been too young to fully understand the danger they'd faced, seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted toward safety. Martha noticed these changes with a mixture of relief and residual fear. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some new crisis to emerge and shatter their fragile peace. But the days passed with nothing more dramatic than a broken fence, a thunderstorm that rattled the windows, and the steady rhythm of harvest season approaching. Caleb noticed her vigilance. One evening in early September, as they sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed, he said quietly, "You're still waiting for something bad to happen." Martha didn't deny it. 13 years of marriage taught me that peace doesn't last. There's always another storm coming. Not in this house. Caleb's voice was firm. I know you've been conditioned to expect violence and chaos, but that's not what we are. Bad things will happen. Cattle will die, crops will fail, money will get tight. But there won't be rage, there won't be fear. You need to let yourself believe that. I'm trying. I know you are. He reached for her hand in gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. Give it time. Trust builds slowly. The first supervised visitation with Daniel was scheduled for mid-September. John Brennan had arranged for it to take place at his office in town, neutral ground with a court-appointed supervisor present. Martha prepared the children as best she could, but the morning they were due to go, the tension in the household was palpable. Ruth refused breakfast. James was unusually quiet. Tommy clung to Martha's skirt, and Annie asked repeatedly if they had to go. It's just for a few hours, Martha said, trying to sound confident. Mr. Brennan will be there the whole time. Your father can't hurt you. What if he tries to keep us? Ruth asked, voicing the fear they all shared. Caleb, who had been standing in the doorway listening, stepped forward. He can't. The law says you come home to us. And if he tries anything, he loses even these visits. He knows that. But what if he doesn't care about the law? Then I'll come get you myself. Caleb's voice carried absolute conviction. You have my word. No matter what happens, you're coming home. The drive into town was tense. Martha sat in the truck cab with the older children while Caleb drove, and she could feel their collective anxiety like a living thing. When they arrived at Brennan's office, the lawyer was waiting outside, his expression reassuring. Everything will be fine, he said. Mrs. Chen is supervising. She's done this for years. She knows how to handle difficult situations. You'll be in the conference room, and I'll be right next door if you need anything. Daniel arrived precisely on time, stepping out of a rented car with a bag of gifts that looked expensive and calculated. He'd dressed carefully, respectable but not flashy, the picture of a concerned father. When he saw the children, his face arranged itself into an expression of joy that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ruth, James, Tommy, Annie, he said, his voice warm. I've missed you all so much. The children said nothing. They stood close together, a united front, and Martha felt fierce pride at their solidarity. Mrs. Chen, a small woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward. Mr. Hale, the children will be with you for 3 hours. I'll be present the entire time. Any inappropriate behavior and the visit ends immediately. Do you understand? Of course. Daniel's voice was pleasant, but Martha saw the flash of anger in his eyes at being supervised like a criminal. She wanted to grab her children and run. Every instinct screamed at her to protect them from this man, but Caleb's hand on her shoulder kept her grounded. They'll be all right, he murmured. We have to trust the system now. The 3 hours felt like 3 days. Martha and Caleb waited at the diner across the street, nursing coffee they didn't want, watching the clock with painful attention. Grace, the diner owner, had heard about the custody case and kept refilling their cups with sympathetic silence. When the time was finally up, Martha practically ran back to Brennan's office. She found the children in the waiting room with Mrs. Chen, all of them looking exhausted but unharmed. How did it go? Martha asked, searching their faces for signs of trauma. Mrs. Chen answered before the children could. It was adequate. Mr. Hale was on his best behavior. He brought gifts, asked about school, tried to engage them in conversation. The children were polite but reserved. Did he say anything inappropriate? Nothing I could cite as a violation, but Mrs. Rowan, I want you to know I've been doing this work for 15 years. I can tell when a parent genuinely cares about rebuilding a relationship and when they're going through motions to maintain legal rights. Your former husband falls into the latter category. The assessment should have brought relief, but instead Martha felt a chill. A man going through motions was unpredictable. He might follow the rules just long enough to gain unsupervised access, and then, We'll document everything, Brennan said, reading her expression. Every visit, every interaction. If there's a pattern of manipulation, or if the children show signs of distress, we'll petition to modify the arrangement. On the drive home, Ruth finally spoke. He kept asking about the ranch, about Mr. Rowan, about how we live. What did you tell him? Caleb asked. The truth. That we have our own rooms, that we help with chores, that we're happy. Ruth paused. He didn't like hearing that we're happy. Martha turned in her seat to look at her daughter. What do you mean? His face changed when I said it, just for a second, like he was angry that we weren't miserable without him. The observation was chilling in its accuracy. Daniel had always needed them to need him, to be broken enough that his control felt like rescue. Their thriving without him was an insult he wouldn't forgive. As autumn deepened and the wheat was harvested, life on the ranch found its rhythm. School started in the one-room schoolhouse 2 miles down the road, and Caleb drove the children each morning before starting his own work. Martha threw herself into preparing the household for winter, canning vegetables, preserving fruit, sewing warmer clothes for children who were growing with alarming speed. She and Caleb had settled into a partnership that felt increasingly natural. They still maintained separate bedrooms, but the emotional distance between them had shrunk considerably. They made decisions together about the children, about the ranch, about the future. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing. And sometimes, when the house was quiet and the world felt safe, they would sit close on the porch and simply exist together in comfortable silence. One evening in October, Martha was mending socks by lamplight when Caleb came in from a late check on the cattle. He looked troubled. What's wrong? She asked immediately. I ran into Tom Morrison in town today. He mentioned that Daniel's been asking questions around the county. About me, about the ranch, about our marriage. Martha's hands stilled on the sock she was darning. What kind of questions? Whether we share a bedroom, whether anyone's seen signs of genuine affection between us, whether the children call me father. Caleb sat down heavily. He's building a case that our marriage is fraudulent, planning to petition for another hearing. Fear spiked through Martha's chest. Can he do that? Brennan says he can try. The judge gave us a year before review, but Daniel could petition for an earlier hearing if he has evidence that circumstances have changed or that we misrepresented our situation. But we didn't lie. We were honest about the nature of our marriage. We were honest in court. But if Daniel can prove to the judge that nothing has changed since then, that we're still living as strangers under one roof, he might argue that the arrangement isn't in the children's best interest. Martha set down her mending, her mind racing. Then we need to make sure there's nothing for him to find. Caleb met her eyes. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that if our marriage needs to look more conventional, then we make it more conventional. People in town should see us as a real couple, not business partners. Martha, I'm not going to pressure you into... You're not pressuring me. I'm choosing this. She stood and moved to sit beside him. These past months, you've shown me what a real partnership looks like. You've been patient and kind and steadfast. I'm not afraid of you, Caleb. I trust you. And if sharing a room protects my children from being taken back to that man, then that's what we'll do. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Are you sure? I'm sure. Then we'll do it right. Not because Daniel is watching, but because we're building something real here. A real marriage, a real family. We'll do it at our own pace, in our own way. Martha felt something tight in her chest loosen. Thank you for understanding. We're in this together. Whatever comes, we face it as partners. The next day, Martha began moving her belongings into Caleb's room. The children noticed, of course. Ruth's eyebrows rose when she saw her mother carrying clothes down the hall, but she said nothing. James looked confused. Tommy asked if Mama and Mr. Rowan were going to be like real married people now, and Annie just accepted it with the easy adaptability of a 4-year-old. That night, lying in bed beside Caleb for the first time, Martha felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and safety. The room was dark except for moonlight through the window, and she could hear his steady breathing beside her. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Yes, just adjusting. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I know. Martha turned to face him. That's why I feel safe. They lay in the darkness, not touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. and gradually Martha felt herself relax. This wasn't the wedding night she'd had 13 years ago, full of fear and obligation. This was different. This was choice. The second supervised visitation came in mid-October. This time the children were less anxious, more resigned. They understood now that these visits were a legal obligation that would eventually end. Daniel was still on his best behavior, still bringing gifts and making small talk, but Mrs. Chen reported that his frustration was showing. "He's losing patience with the supervision," she told Martha afterward. "He kept trying to have private conversations with the children, particularly Ruth. I had to remind him several times that I needed to hear everything being said." What was he trying to talk to Ruth about? He wanted to know if she was happy at the ranch, if Mr. Rowan treated her well, if she felt loved. Mrs. Chen's expression was knowing. He's fishing for complaints, trying to find something he can use. Ruth won't give him anything. She's too smart for that. I know, but be aware. He's building towards something. I've seen this pattern before. The gifts, the questions, the carefully maintained facade. He's playing a long game. Martha shared this information with Caleb that evening, and they agreed to be even more vigilant. They also made a point of being more publicly affectionate when they went into town, holding hands, standing close, showing the world that their marriage was real and solid. The town noticed. Grace at the diner smiled knowingly when she saw them. Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house commented that marriage clearly agreed with Martha. Even the general store owner, who'd been skeptical about their quick wedding, seemed convinced now that this was a genuine relationship. But more importantly, the children noticed. They saw their mother laughing more, relaxing into Caleb's presence. They saw Caleb becoming more openly affectionate, putting his arm around Martha's shoulders, kissing her cheek when he came in from the fields. And they responded by calling him Pa more often, by seeking his advice, by treating him as a father rather than a benefactor. One evening in late October, James came to Caleb with a problem about school. Another boy had been bullying him, calling him names because his real father didn't want him. "That's not true, is it, Pa?" James asked, his voice small. "That father didn't want us?" Caleb looked at Martha, who nodded permission to handle it. "Your father wanted to keep you," Caleb said carefully. "But wanting to keep someone and being able to care for them properly are different things. Your mother made a brave choice to take you somewhere safe. That doesn't mean your father didn't want you. It means your mother wanted better for you." "But you're our father now, aren't you?" "Really?" Caleb's expression softened. "I'm your pa in every way that matters, James. I'll always be here for you, always protect you, always help you become the man you're meant to be. That's what being a father means." James threw his arms around Caleb's waist, and Martha saw her husband's eyes grow suspiciously bright as he held the boy close. November brought the first serious cold, and with it, a letter from Daniel's lawyer. He was petitioning for unsupervised visitation, claiming that 3 months of successful supervised visits proved he posed no threat to the children. Brennan fought it, but the judge ruled in Daniel's favor. Starting in December, Daniel would have 1 unsupervised weekend per month with the children. The news hit Martha like a physical blow. Unsupervised meant no protection, no witness, no one to stop him if he decided to disappear with them. "He won't take them," Caleb said, reading her panic. "He knows if he violates the court order, he loses everything. He's not that stupid." "You don't know him like I do. He's capable of anything when his pride is wounded." "Then we prepare the children. We make sure they know what to do if he tries anything, and we trust that they're strong enough to protect themselves." Martha knew he was right, but the fear was visceral. She'd spent months building a safe haven for her children, and now the law was forcing her to hand them over to the person they'd fled from. The first unsupervised visit was scheduled for the first weekend in December. Daniel would pick up the children Friday evening and return them Sunday afternoon. 48 hours that felt like a lifetime. Martha spent the week before preparing the children. She made sure they knew Brennan's office number, knew how to contact the local sheriff, knew that if anything felt wrong, they should speak up immediately. Ruth, now 13 and increasingly mature, took her aside. "Mama, you need to trust us. We know Father now. We're not little children who can be manipulated anymore. We'll be careful." "I know you will. You just love us and want to protect us. We know. But you have to let us do this. The judge said so, and if we fight it, Father will use that against you." The wisdom in her daughter's words was both reassuring and heartbreaking. Ruth had grown up too fast, learned lessons about survival and strategy that no 13-year-old should need. When Daniel arrived Friday evening, he was alone in a different rented car, looking pleased with himself. The children loaded their overnight bags with obvious reluctance, and Martha had to physically restrain herself from pulling them back. "I'll have them back by 3 on Sunday," Daniel said, his tone pleasant but his eyes cold when they met Martha's. "We'll have a wonderful time together, won't we, children?" The children murmured agreement, and Martha watched them drive away with her heart in her throat. The weekend was torture. Martha couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the clock. Caleb stayed close, trying to distract her with ranch work and conversation, but nothing helped. "They'll be fine," he said repeatedly. "They're smart and capable. Ruth will watch the younger ones. They know how to reach us if needed." What if Daniel convinces them that I'm the problem? What if he turns them against me? That won't happen. They know the truth. They lived it. Sunday afternoon came with agonizing slowness. 3 o'clock arrived, then 3:15, then 3:30. Martha stood at the window watching the road, her anxiety building with each passing minute. At 3:45, Daniel's car finally appeared. The children climbed out, looking tired but unharmed. Daniel drove away without getting out, without even pretending to be cordial. Martha gathered her children close, checking them over like a mother hen. "Are you all right? Did everything go okay?" "It was fine, Mama," Ruth said, but there was something in her voice that didn't quite ring true. "Ruth, tell me the truth." The girl looked at her younger siblings, then back at Martha. "Can we talk inside? Just you and me?" They went upstairs to Ruth's room while Caleb stayed with the other children. Once the door was closed, Ruth's composure cracked. "He tried to convince us to stay," she said quietly. "He said the judge made a mistake. He said you manipulated Mr. Rowan into marrying you. He said if we loved him, we'd want to come home." Martha felt rage and fear warring in her chest. "What did you say?" "I told him we are home, that the ranch is our home now and you and Pa are our parents." He got angry, not violent, but cold. He said fine, if that's how we felt, he'd make sure the judge heard about it. "Did he threaten you?" "Not exactly. But Mama, he's planning something. I could see it in his face. He thinks if he can prove that you and Pa aren't really married, or that we've been coached to say certain things, he can get custody again." Martha pulled her daughter close. "Let him try. We've done nothing wrong. Our marriage is real. You haven't been coached, and the judge already ruled in our favor once." But privately, Martha felt the old fear creeping back. Daniel was persistent and vindictive. He wouldn't stop until he either got what he wanted or burned everything to the ground trying. That night, she shared Ruth's report with Caleb. His expression grew grimmer with each detail. "He's looking for cracks," Caleb said, "trying to find weaknesses he can exploit. We need to be stronger than ever. United front, no doubts, no hesitation." "I'm scared," Martha admitted. "Not for me, for them." "What if he finds a way?" Caleb took her face in his hands, making her look at him. "He won't, because we're not going to give him anything to work with. Our marriage is real. Our family is real. And if he wants to challenge that in court again, we'll fight him with everything we have." December brought snow, and with it, a kind of enforced peace. The ranch work slowed, the children were on winter break from school, and the world contracted to the warm circle of their household. They spent evenings around the fireplace, the children doing lessons or playing quiet games while Martha sewed and Caleb read. It felt almost normal, almost safe. Christmas approached, and Martha found herself wanting to make it special. Not the tense, performative holidays she'd endured with Daniel, but something real and warm. She baked cookies with the children, helped them make decorations from pine boughs and ribbon. Caleb cut down a small tree and set it up in the parlor, and they spent an evening stringing popcorn and making paper ornaments. On Christmas Eve, after the children had hung their stockings and gone to bed with barely contained excitement, Martha and Caleb sat by the fire, wrapped in companionable silence. "This is my first real Christmas in years," Martha said quietly. "The first one that feels like joy instead of obligation." "Mine too." Caleb reached for her hand. Sarah died just before Christmas 3 years ago. The holidays have been hard since then, but this year, with you and the children, it feels like life coming back. Martha leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. I never thanked you properly. For all of this. For saving us. You've thanked me every day by being here, by building this life with me. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. A family. A purpose beyond just surviving. They sat in the firelight, and Martha felt something shift inside her. This wasn't gratitude or convenience or even just respect. This was love, the quiet, steady kind that grew from shared challenges and mutual support, the kind that lasted. Caleb, she said softly, I need to tell you something. He turned to face her, his expression open and patient. When we married, it was for protection, a legal arrangement, but somewhere along the way it became real for me. You became real for me, not as a protector or a benefactor, but as my husband, my partner, the person I want to build a life with. Caleb's hand tightened on hers. Are you saying this? I'm saying I love you, not the desperate, grateful love of someone being rescued, but the deep, choosing you everyday love of someone who sees exactly who you are and wants to stay anyway. For a moment, Caleb couldn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was rough with emotion. I love you too. I've been falling in love with you for months, the way you fight for your children, the way you've brought life back to this house, the way you laugh when you think no one's listening. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way about anyone again. He kissed her then, deep and tender, and Martha felt the last walls around her heart finally come down. This was safety. This was home. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, and the children's delight at their modest gifts, carved toys from Caleb, knitted scarves from Martha, peppermint sticks and oranges in their stockings, filled the house with joy. They sat together for a special breakfast of pancakes and bacon, and Martha looked around the table at her family with profound gratitude. This was worth every hard mile she'd walked, every terrifying moment, every sacrifice. Her children were safe, loved, and thriving. She had a husband who cherished her. She had a home that felt like sanctuary. 2 days later, the second unsupervised visit came. Daniel arrived with more gifts, more false warmth, and the children went with the same resigned acceptance as before. Martha watched them go with less panic this time, trusting in their strength and their unity. Sunday afternoon, they returned with news that made Martha's blood run cold. Daniel had told them he was getting remarried, to a woman with 3 children of her own. He'd be petitioning the court again, claiming he could now provide a proper family environment with a mother figure present. He said the judge would have to reconsider custody now, James reported. He said we'd finally have a real family. Martha looked at Caleb, seeing her own concern reflected in his eyes. A remarriage would change the legal landscape. Daniel could argue that he'd address the instability issue, that he could provide a traditional 2-parent household, but Ruth spoke up, her voice firm. I told him we already have a real family, and that no judge in the world could make us want to live with him and some stranger he's marrying for legal advantage. What did he say to that? Caleb asked. He said we'd see, that 13-year-old girls don't get to decide where they live, that the law favors fathers who can provide proper homes. Ruth's expression was fierce. But he's wrong, isn't he, Pa? The judge already said we stay here. The judge said primary custody stays here, Caleb corrected gently. But your father can petition for a review. We'll fight it if he does, but you need to be prepared for more court proceedings. The news cast a shadow over the holidays, but Martha refused to let Daniel steal their peace entirely. Whatever came, they would face it together. As a family. As partners who'd chosen each other and would keep choosing each other no matter what challenges arose. January brought bitter cold and the confirmation they'd been dreading. Daniel had filed for another custody hearing scheduled for late February. His petition claimed changed circumstances based on his impending marriage to a woman named Patricia Whitmore, coincidentally the sister of his lawyer. The manipulation was obvious, but it was also legally valid. Brennan began preparing their defense, but his expression was grave. This complicates things, he admitted during a strategy meeting at the ranch. The judge liked that you provided a 2-parent household. Now Daniel can claim the same. We'll need to emphasize the children's established stability, their clear preference to stay with you, and the fact that Daniel's marriage appears to be exactly what yours was accused of being, a legal convenience. How do we prove that? Martha asked. We investigate. Find out everything we can about Patricia Whitmore. How long they've known each other, whether she has any genuine connection to the children, whether this relationship developed before or after the last hearing. Over the following weeks, as winter deepened and the ranch hunkered down against the cold, they prepared for another battle. But this time Martha wasn't the same frightened woman who'd walked into that courtroom the first time. She was stronger now, grounded in the solid reality of the life she'd built. And she had Caleb beside her, steady as the mountains, ready to fight for their family with everything he had. The investigation into Patricia Whitmore revealed exactly what they'd suspected. She was Robert Whitmore's younger sister, recently divorced with 3 children and struggling financially. She'd met Daniel at her brother's office just 2 weeks after the first custody hearing. Their engagement had been announced in early December, suspiciously timed to maximize impact on the upcoming review. It's transparent, Brennan said, spreading the documentation across Caleb's kitchen table. But transparency doesn't make it invalid. She's a real person, they're legally engaged, and they can claim they fell in love quickly, just as you did. Except we actually built a life together, Martha said. We didn't just manufacture a relationship for court. I know that, you know that, but we need to prove it in a way the judge can't dismiss. Brennan tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. The children are our strongest weapon. Their testimony was powerful last time, and they're older now, more articulate. If they can clearly express their desire to stay with you and explain why Daniel's sudden family arrangement doesn't change that, it will carry weight. Over the next weeks, they prepared carefully. Brennan coached the children without putting words in their mouths, teaching them to speak their truth clearly and calmly. Ruth, now 13 and poised beyond her years, would be particularly crucial. James at 10 could articulate his feelings well. Even Tommy, now 7, could express basic preferences. But the real wild card was what Daniel might do. He'd proven himself capable of manipulation and strategic thinking. They had to assume he was preparing something devastating. The third unsupervised visit came in mid-January, and this time Daniel brought Patricia. She was a slim woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile, and she tried too hard to be warm with the children. I've heard so much about you, she gushed to Ruth. Your father talks about you constantly. I can't wait for us all to be a family. The children were polite but distant. When they returned Sunday evening, Ruth's report was scathing. She doesn't care about us. She kept asking questions like she was reading from a script. What are your favorite foods? What games do you like? It was all performance. Ruth's voice was sharp with adolescent perception. And Father kept watching her interact with us like he was grading her performance. It was creepy. Did she seem unkind? Caleb asked carefully. No, just fake, like she's playing a role. Ruth paused. Her children seem miserable too. The oldest is a boy my age, and he barely spoke. When I asked if he was okay, he said his mother told him this marriage would solve all their problems. That's why she's doing it, for money and stability, not for Father or us. The information was valuable, but also concerning. It painted Patricia as a victim of circumstance as much as a willing participant, which made her harder to villainize in court. February arrived with brutal cold and mounting tension. The hearing was scheduled for the 23rd, and as the date approached, Martha found herself struggling with familiar nightmares. In them, the judge handed her children to Daniel, and she watched helplessly as they were driven away, screaming for her. She woke from one such nightmare in the early hours of February 15th, her heart pounding. Beside her, Caleb stirred immediately. Another bad dream? Same one. I can't shake the feeling that we're going to lose. Caleb pulled her close, and she felt his steady heartbeat against her cheek. We're not going to lose. We have truth on our side, and the children's clear preference. Daniel can manufacture a family all he wants, but he can't manufacture years of established stability and genuine love. What if that's not enough? Then we appeal. We keep fighting, but Martha... He tilted her face up to meet his eyes in the darkness. You need to believe we can win this. If you walk into that courtroom expecting to lose, the judge will sense that doubt. She knew he was right. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had to be strong for her children, had to project absolute confidence that they belonged together. The next morning, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from a woman named Caroline Hayes in Kansas, Daniel's former neighbor. She'd heard about the custody case from Mrs. Pritchard, the neighbor who'd submitted the affidavit, and she had information she believed the court needed to hear. She was willing to travel to Colorado to testify in person if her expenses were covered. Brennan read the letter with growing intensity. This could be significant. Mrs. Hayes claims to have witnessed multiple incidents of Daniel's violence, including one where he struck James hard enough to leave marks. She also states she's willing to testify about Daniel's drinking habits and his reputation in the neighborhood. Why didn't she come forward before? Martha asked. Fear, most likely. Many people don't want to get involved in domestic situations. But now that it's a custody case with legal protection for witnesses, she's willing to speak up. Brennan looked at Caleb. Can you cover her travel expenses? Whatever it takes. Mrs. Hayes arrived 3 days before the hearing, a middle-aged woman with a forthright manner and eyes that had seen too much suffering. Over coffee in Brennan's office, she laid out years of observation in devastating detail. I lived next door to the Hales for 5 years, she said. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Daniel drank. On weekends especially, you could hear him shouting through the walls. I saw Martha with bruises more than once. I saw the children flinch when he raised his voice. And I saw him hit that boy, James, when the child was maybe 8 years old, hit him across the face hard enough to knock him down. Martha came out screaming, put herself between them. Why didn't you report it? Brennan asked. Mrs. Hayes' expression was pained. I'm ashamed to say I didn't want to get involved. My own marriage was difficult. I was barely keeping my head above water. I told myself it wasn't my business. But when Eleanor Pritchard wrote to tell me Martha had finally gotten away and was fighting for custody, I knew I had to speak up. I've regretted my silence for years. This is my chance to make it right. Her testimony would be powerful, but it also meant Daniel would know his past was being publicly exposed. There was no telling how he might react. The night before the hearing, the household was subdued. The children went to bed early, exhausted from tension. Martha and Caleb sat in the parlor, the fire burning low, neither of them speaking much. Whatever happens tomorrow, Martha finally said, I want you to know what this has meant to me, what you've meant to me. You saved us, Caleb, not just legally, but in every way that matters. You gave us a home and a life when we had nothing. You gave me just as much, Caleb replied, a second chance at family, at love, at purpose beyond just existing. He took her hand, but we're not talking like this is goodbye. We're walking into that courtroom together, and we're walking out together with our children. Believe that. I'm trying. Don't try. Know it. The certainty in his voice finally broke through Martha's fear. She nodded, squaring her shoulders. He was right. They'd come too far and fought too hard to doubt now. Morning came cold and bright. Martha dressed carefully in her best dress, pinned her hair with precision, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was different from the desperate, hollow-eyed person who'd stepped off the train in Colorado 8 months ago. This woman had strength in her spine and steel in her eyes. This woman was a fighter. The children dressed in their Sunday clothes, solemn but not afraid. They'd prepared for this, understood what was at stake. Ruth gave her mother a fierce hug before they left. We're ready, Mama. Whatever they ask, we'll tell the truth. The courthouse was already busy when they arrived. Daniel and Patricia were there with Robert Whitmore, all of them projecting confidence and respectability. Patricia wore an expensive dress and had the children from her first marriage with her, visual evidence of the instant family Daniel could provide. But when Mrs. Hayes walked in, flanked by Brennan, Daniel's confidence visibly cracked. He recognized her immediately, and the color drained from his face. He leaned close to his lawyer, whispering urgently. Judge Harrison called the court to order, and Martha felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This is a review hearing in the matter of Hale versus Rowan, the judge began. Mr. Hale has petitioned for modification of the custody arrangement based on changed circumstances. Let's proceed. Whitmore opened with a presentation of Daniel's new situation, his engagement to Patricia, the blended family they would create, the stable home environment with a mother figure present. Patricia testified about her desire to help raise Daniel's children, her experience with her own kids, her belief that children needed both parents. It was all very compelling and very hollow. Then Brennan called Mrs. Hayes. The neighbor took the stand with quiet dignity and methodically destroyed Daniel's facade. She described specific incidents with dates and details. She testified about the screaming matches, the broken furniture visible through windows, the police being called twice for domestic disturbances. She described seeing James with a handprint-shaped bruise on his face and Martha with a split lip. "Did you ever hear Mr. Hale threaten his family?" Brennan asked. "Yes, multiple times. He would shout that they were worthless, that no one else would put up with them, that Martha was lucky he tolerated her. Once I heard him tell the children that if they ever told anyone about problems at home, he'd make sure they regretted it." Whitmore's cross-examination was vicious, attacking Mrs. Hayes's credibility, her timing, her motivations. But she didn't waver. She acknowledged her earlier silence with shame, but stood firm on what she'd witnessed. Daniel took the stand to defend himself, claiming Mrs. Hayes was lying or misremembering, that any discipline had been appropriate, that any arguments had been normal marital disagreements. But his performance was less convincing now, his anger leaking through the careful facade. Then Brennan called Ruth. The girl walked to the stand with her head high, and Martha's heart swelled with pride and fear in equal measure. Ruth took the oath with a steady voice and met the judge's eyes directly. "Ruth," Brennan began gently, "you're 13 years old now, correct?" "Yes, sir." "And you're old enough to understand what this hearing is about?" "Yes, sir. My father wants custody of me and my siblings. We don't want that." "Can you tell the judge why?" Ruth took a breath. "Because living with our father meant being afraid all the time. It meant watching our mother get hurt and not being able to stop it. It meant my little brother getting grabbed by the throat for breaking a plate. It meant we went to bed hungry because father spent money on whiskey instead of food." Her voice never wavered, never rose to emotion. She simply stated facts. "And now? How is life different with your mother and Mr. Rowan?" "We're safe. We have enough food. We go to school. Nobody hits us or screams at us. Mr. Rowan, Pa, he's patient and kind. He teaches us things and listens when we talk. Mama smiles now. She used to never smile." "Your father is engaged to be married," Brennan continued. "He says he can provide a proper family now. What do you think about that?" "I think he's getting married because his lawyer told him to. Patricia seems nice enough, but she doesn't know us, and we don't know her. You can't create a real family just by getting married. It takes time and trust, and we don't trust father. He hurt us too many times." Whitmore tried to shake her testimony, implying she'd been coached, suggesting she was too young to make such judgments, but Ruth was unshakable. "I know what I lived through, sir," she said firmly. "Nobody coached me to remember being scared. Nobody had to teach me what it feels like to watch your mother get hit. I'm 13, not stupid. I know the difference between a real family and a fake one." James testified next, describing life before and after with the simple clarity of a 10-year-old. Tommy, now 7, told the judge he didn't want to live with the mean father, and that he liked living on the ranch with Pa. When it was Martha's turn, she spoke with hard-won composure about the years of abuse, the decision to flee, the months of struggle before finding safety. She acknowledged her marriage to Caleb had started as protection, but testified honestly about how it had grown into genuine partnership and love. "My children are thriving," she said. "They're healthy, educated, loved, and safe. Whatever mistakes I made in how I left, I've given them a life worth living. That's all I've ever wanted." Caleb testified last, and his quiet strength filled the courtroom. He spoke about the day Martha had walked up to him on that dusty road, about watching her work tirelessly to care for her children, about the respect that had grown into love. "I didn't marry Martha to help her win a custody case," he said. "I married her because she needed protection and I could provide it. But I'd marry her again today for entirely different reasons. Because she's my partner, because her children have become mine, because we've built something real together. Daniel Hale can manufacture whatever family arrangement he wants, but he can't manufacture what we have. Time, trust, and genuine care. That's what makes a family." When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Harrison called for a brief recess. The wait was excruciating. Martha sat with Caleb's arm around her shoulders, the children pressed close, and tried to breathe through her anxiety. Mrs. Hayes approached them during the recess. "I hope my testimony helped," she said quietly. "I should have spoken up years ago. I'm sorry I didn't." "You spoke up when it mattered most," Martha replied. "Thank you for your courage." When court resumed, Judge Harrison's expression was grave. "I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony," he began. "This case presents a complicated situation with valid concerns on both sides." Martha's stomach dropped. "Mr. Hale is the biological father and has certain rights that cannot be dismissed lightly. He has presented evidence of changed circumstances and appears to be making efforts to create a stable family environment." Daniel's face brightened with hope. "However," the judge continued, and his tone sharpened, "the court must prioritize the welfare and clear preference of the children involved. The testimony of Ruth, James, and Tommy was consistent, credible, and deeply concerning. Ruth in particular demonstrated maturity and clarity unusual for her age. She was not a child parroting coached answers. She was a young woman speaking her truth." Ruth's hand found Martha's and squeezed hard. "Mrs. Hayes's testimony, while it comes late, corroborates the children's accounts and Mrs. Rowan's claims of domestic violence. The court finds her testimony credible and significant." Daniel's face was darkening with anger. Furthermore, the court notes that while Mr. Hale's engagement may be legitimate, it appears strategically timed and lacks the organic development and established stability present in the Rowan household. The children have been with Mrs. Rowan and Mr. Rowan for 8 months now. They've established routines, enrolled in school, developed relationships with their stepfather. They are clearly thriving. Judge Harrison looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Hale, I believe you love your children in your own way, but love alone does not make a man a good father. The evidence suggests you have a pattern of violent behavior, alcohol abuse, and emotional manipulation. Until you address these issues through sustained counseling and demonstrate genuine change over an extended period, I cannot in good conscience place these children in your custody." Martha felt tears beginning to blur her vision. "Therefore, my ruling is as follows. Primary custody remains with Martha Rowan and Caleb Rowan. Mr. Hale's visitation will continue to be supervised for a minimum of 1 year. During that time, he must complete an anger management program, substance abuse counseling, and parenting classes. If he successfully completes these requirements and demonstrates consistent appropriate behavior, we may revisit the visitation arrangement. However, custody will not be reconsidered unless and until Mr. Hale shows fundamental, sustained change." The gavel came down with finality. "Furthermore, I'm ordering a 1-year moratorium on custody petitions. Mr. Hale, you cannot file for another custody hearing during this period unless emergency circumstances arise. This family needs stability, and these children need peace. Court is adjourned." Martha couldn't breathe for a moment. Then it all hit her at once. They'd won. Completely. Decisively. Finally won. The children rushed to her, all of them crying and laughing simultaneously. Caleb wrapped his arms around all of them, and Martha heard the rough emotion in his voice as he said, "We're going home, all of us, for good." Across the courtroom, Daniel was on his feet, his face contorted with rage. He started toward them, but the bailiff intercepted him immediately. "Mr. Hale, I suggest you leave the courthouse calmly," the bailiff said firmly. Daniel shook off the bailiff's hand but stopped his advance. His eyes met Martha's across the room, and she saw pure hatred there. For a moment, she felt a flicker of the old fear. Then Caleb stepped partially in front of her, his posture protective but not aggressive, and Martha felt her spine straighten. She wasn't afraid anymore. Daniel had no power over her now. "Let's go home," she said quietly to her family. They walked out of the courthouse into brilliant February sunshine, the cold air shocking and clean. Martha felt lighter than she had in years, as if some massive weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Brennan caught up with them on the courthouse steps. "Congratulations," he said, shaking Caleb's hand and smiling at Martha. "That was about as definitive a ruling as you could hope for. Harrison essentially shut down any possibility of Daniel regaining custody unless he undergoes a complete personality transformation." "Will he appeal?" Martha asked. "He can try, but he won't succeed. The evidence against him was too strong, and the children's testimony was devastating. Most importantly, Harrison imposed that moratorium. Even if Daniel files an appeal, it won't be heard for months, And by then, you'll have even more established stability. Brennan's expression grew serious. But be careful for the next few weeks. Men like Daniel don't handle losing well. He might try to contact you directly or show up at the ranch. If he does, document everything and call the sheriff immediately. We'll be vigilant, Caleb promised. The drive home was jubilant. The children chattered excitedly about the future, making plans for spring planting and summer projects. Ruth talked about wanting to learn to ride horses properly. James wanted to help Caleb with fence building. Even Tommy and Annie, who understood less of the legal complexities, sensed that something fundamental had shifted toward safety. As they approached the ranch, the familiar sight of the wheat fields and the house rising from the prairie filled Martha with profound gratitude. This was home, not just shelter or safety, but genuine home. That evening, after the children had finally exhausted themselves with celebration and gone to bed, Martha and Caleb sat on the porch despite the cold. The stars were brilliant in the clear winter sky, and the silence of the prairie stretched around them like a blessing. "I keep waiting to wake up," Martha said quietly, "for this to be a dream. It's real. You're safe. The children are yours. We won." Caleb pulled her closer against the cold. "You can stop running now, Martha. You can finally rest." The words broke something loose in her chest, and she found herself crying, not from fear or sadness, but from sheer relief. All the months of terror, of desperate struggle, of fighting to keep her children safe. It was finally, truly over. Caleb held her while she cried, his presence steady and solid. When she finally quieted, he said, "I have something I want to ask you." Martha looked up at him, curious. "I know we're already married legally, but I'd like to do it again, properly this time. Not because we have to, but because we want to. A real wedding with the children there in front of the whole town if you'd like. A public declaration that this is real and permanent." Martha felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, but these were joyful. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'd like that very much." They married again in April, when the wheat fields were just beginning to show green, and the prairie was coming back to life after winter's harshness. The ceremony was held at the small church in town, with Grace from the diner and Mrs. Peterson and John Brennan and half the county in attendance. The children stood up with them, Ruth and James on Martha's side, Tommy and Annie on Caleb's. Ruth wore a new dress Martha had sewn specially for the occasion, and she beamed with pride as she watched her mother take vows freely chosen rather than desperately needed. This time, when Caleb slid the ring on Martha's finger, the same ring, but worn now with intention rather than convenience, the promise was different. Not protection, but partnership. Not rescue, but mutual choosing. "I, Caleb James Rowan, take you, Martha Ann, to be my wife. Not from obligation, not from necessity, but from love. I choose you today and every day forward. I, Martha Ann, take you, Caleb James, to be my husband. Not from fear, not from desperation, but from love. I choose you today and every day forward." The kiss that sealed their vows was witnessed by their community and blessed by their children's joy. And when they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, truly, freely, completely, Martha felt the last chains of her past finally fall away. Spring turned to summer, and life on the ranch developed the comfortable rhythms of genuine family. The children grew taller, browner from sun, stronger from work and good food. Ruth began helping with the more complex household management, learning to keep books and manage supplies. James worked alongside Caleb with increasing skill, already showing signs of the capable man he would become. Tommy lost his last traces of fearfulness, becoming bold and adventurous. Annie grew from a quiet, watchful child into a chattering, confident little girl who wrapped both her parents around her finger. Daniel's supervised visits continued for 3 months, growing increasingly sporadic. He would show up for 2 visits, then miss 1. He completed the initial anger management classes, but never enrolled in the substance abuse counseling. By June, he'd stopped coming altogether, and they heard through town gossip that his engagement to Patricia had ended and he'd returned to Kansas. "Do you think he'll ever change?" Martha asked Caleb one evening. "I think some men are too invested in their own victimhood to change. Daniel would rather blame you for everything than examine his own behavior." Caleb paused. "But it doesn't matter anymore. He's lost his hold on you and the children. That's what matters. In August, on the anniversary of their first desperate wedding, Martha discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Joy at the thought of bringing new life into this safe, loving home, terror at the memories of pregnancy under Daniel's roof. Caleb saw her fear and addressed it directly. "This is different," he said gently, his hand on her still flat stomach. "This child will be born into love, not fear. You'll be cherished through every moment of this pregnancy, not resented. And our children," he gestured toward where Ruth was teaching Annie to churn butter, where James and Tommy were stacking firewood. "They'll help raise this baby with nothing but joy." He was right. When they told the children, the reaction was euphoric. Ruth immediately began planning a nursery. James declared he'd teach the baby everything about ranching. Tommy wanted to know if it would be a brother. Annie just wanted to help with everything. The pregnancy progressed with none of the stress and fear that had marked Martha's previous ones. Caleb was attentive without being overbearing, the children were excited, and the whole household seemed to glow with anticipation. In early spring, as the wheat fields once again began their transformation from winter brown to spring green, Martha gave birth to a son. He came into the world on a mild March morning with the windows open and prairie wind blowing through the room, surrounded by family who welcomed him with tears of joy. They named him Samuel, after Caleb's father. He had dark hair and gray eyes that would eventually match his father's, and from the moment Caleb held him, Martha knew this child would grow up knowing nothing but safety and love. The older children were smitten. Ruth held him with practiced care. James was gentle and protective. Tommy wanted to show him everything, and Annie appointed herself his personal guardian. "This is my baby brother," she announced to anyone who would listen. "I'm going to teach him everything important." As Martha sat in the rocking chair that had belonged to Caleb's mother, nursing her son while her husband worked nearby and her older children did homework at the kitchen table, she thought back to that scorching summer day when she'd walked up to a stranger on a dusty road with nothing but desperation and 4 frightened children. She'd been seeking work. She'd found a life. She'd been running from violence. She'd found peace. She'd been alone and terrified. She'd found family and love. The summer that had pressed down on her with merciless heat, that had witnessed her most desperate moments and her hardest choices, had ultimately led her here, to a home filled with laughter and purpose, to a marriage built on respect and genuine affection, to children who were thriving in ways she'd once only dared to dream about. Time moved forward in the steady way of ranching communities. Seasons turned, crops were planted and harvested, cattle were born, raised, sold. The children grew. Ruth eventually went to teacher's college and returned to teach at the same one-room schoolhouse she'd attended. James took over more and more of the ranch work, showing natural talent for animal husbandry. Tommy discovered a gift for mechanics. Annie developed a sharp business mind and helped her mother manage the ranch finances. Samuel grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy who knew nothing of the desperation that had preceded his birth, who took for granted the love and stability that his mother had fought so hard to secure. Daniel never returned to Colorado. They heard years later that he died in Kansas, a fall downstairs after a night of drinking. The news brought Martha a complicated mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that he could never threaten her children again. Sorrow for the man he might have been if he'd ever chosen to change. But mostly, she felt nothing. He'd become irrelevant to their lives long before his death made that irrelevance permanent. On Martha's 40th birthday, Caleb organized a celebration that brought the whole community to the ranch. There was food and music and laughter, and as Martha looked around at the life they'd built, at their 5 children, at the neighbors who'd become friends, at the ranch that had transformed from a lonely bachelor's holding into a thriving family enterprise, she felt complete. Ruth, now 21 and engaged to be married herself, pulled her mother aside during the party. "I've been thinking about writing down our story," she said. "Not for publication, just for the family. So Samuel and any future grandchildren will know how brave you were, how you saved us." Martha shook her head. "I didn't save you alone. Your pa saved us all." "You saved each other," Ruth corrected. "That's the real story, isn't it? 2 people who were broken in different ways, who found each other and built something whole together. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Martha and Caleb sat on their porch, the same porch where they'd shared that first careful conversation about marriage, where they'd worried through long nights, where they'd celebrated victories and weathered defeats. The wheat fields stretched away into darkness, and stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The prairie wind carried the smell of earth and growing things and promise. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked quietly. "Taking us on? All the complications and danger and legal battles." Caleb pulled her close. "Not for a single moment. You gave me back my life, Martha. Before you and the children, I was just going through motions. Now every day has purpose. Every day has joy." "I love you," Martha said. Simple words that carried the weight of everything they'd survived and built together. "I love you too. Always have. Always will." They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other in desperate circumstances and chosen to build something lasting. The summer heat that had once felt like an enemy now felt like a blessing, warming the earth that fed them, ripening the wheat that sustained them, promising abundance. Martha thought about that desperate woman who'd stepped off a train with 4 children and nowhere to go. She thought about the quiet rancher who'd asked not about her past, but about what she could do. She thought about a marriage that began as legal protection and became genuine partnership. She thought about all the ways a life could break and all the ways it could heal. And sitting there in the darkness, with her husband's arm around her shoulders and her children safe in the house behind her, Martha knew with bone-deep certainty that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not rescue, not charity, not even just survival. She'd found home. Real, lasting, chosen home. And that made every hard mile, every frightening moment, every sacrifice worthwhile. The summer that had once threatened to destroy her had instead transformed into the foundation of everything good in her life. The heat that had beaten down mercilessly had eventually given way to seasons of growth and harvest and renewal. The desperation that had driven her to take that first terrifying step toward change had led her exactly where she needed to be. As the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind sang through the wheat fields, Martha Rowan, no longer running, no longer afraid, no longer alone, finally allowed herself to rest in the peace she'd earned and the love she'd found. The story that had begun with summer's scorching heat and a woman with nothing left to lose had become something far greater than survival. It had become a testament to courage, to second chances, to the possibility of building something beautiful from broken pieces. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.